Hello, everybody, and welcome to the One Spark Network. My name is Eric J. Hecker, and I am here today with Gene Sticco. Gene is a very interesting person that I met in the X Spaces on the X Twitter platform. Gene has a very interesting background, from prior affiliation to the military to being involved in, I guess, what you would say is, for lack of a better term, the espionage aspects of the oil industry. If those words are inaccurate, feel free to give me better versions. But in that capacity, Gene also came out as a whistleblower to the oil industry. And since then, has learned that he's, I guess, kind of married into a bigger situation that's going on in this planet regarding, I guess, the battle between truth and deception. And I appreciate that Gene seems to be a champion of being on the right side of this battle, unlike most in the topics that Gene and I find ourselves engaging in as of late. So I can only imagine, Gene, that you're probably pretty surprised at where you are at this point in life as much as I am. And I imagine that that's probably why we have such interesting conversations and engagements. But with that being said, Gene, good morning and welcome to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the wonderful introduction. I tend to describe my background as intelligence focused than the sexier espionage. But I know
I
I know
understand.
how the game goes. You gotta sell it for the people, right?
Understood. And but I was actually thinking about that this morning, Gene, planning on this conversation, and not to cast shade on you as an individual, but just I was thinking, like, being honest about the trade, right? The trade that you were involved in. I think all too often it gets a bit sugar-coated as to what
Sure.
the activities these corporations actively engage in are.
Yeah.
As I'm sure from the perspective of the corporations, they would want to cast it in the best light possible. Of course, we have representatives of our company gathering information, to help grow our company and be lucrative and profitable and provide the products that we have to the world.
Right. But isn't that the problem? That's
Yes,
what it's all about now is the narrative.
yes,
It's about the word crafting, the
yes,
wordsmithing,
yes.
as we hear,
Hmm.
right? We've seen it in the evolution of UFO to UAP and all the other acronyms that have been softened or updated or retired in order to make way for a better word or a better acronym. It's we're surrounded by it.
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of where my brain was going at, is that's the obvious narrative control that's being applied to so many different things on so many levels,
Yeah.
which brings us to the conversation that we're going to engage in today, which is more specific to the ecosystem, let's say, that exists in the disclosure movement or the disclosure circus, depending on the perspective of the person that's paying attention. I'm
Or
of the opinion. Go ahead.
dare say the disclosure economy,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
If we're gonna try and be honest and transparent about this,
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
I think that's the driver that we might be competing with.
Fair enough. And then in regard to your previous tradecraft, I can only imagine that from your perspective, having your focus moved in this direction, potentially, I'm of the opinion, engaging you, that this is all relatively new stuff, that, your focus and your attention hasn't been put in this direction, let's say, for that long. But now, in that short period of time that has been in your purview, I imagine that this is just screaming to you of tactics being applied and trade craft and tools that you're very familiar with.
Yeah, and I think certain. I've told you the story in other formats and forums we've chatted. I grew up in the Italian North End of Boston, right? I had a lot of family members and friends and their family members who were engaged in a lot of the Italian American shady stuff that happened and was prevalent in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so forth. And I laughed when I got into the oil and gas business and I was running around Europe and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union and in Africa, dealing with organized crime and dealing with black market trades. And I would, be sitting down with some of these figures who were engaged in that. And they'd always tell me, you don't understand. This is X business from whatever country we were in, and things are different here, and all the rest of them. No, not actually. You're what Tony No Fingers used to do down on Endicott Street in Boston, just at a larger scale, right? It's all economy of scale. You didn't create anything new, and that's exactly what I found walking in this community when I took a step back and started thinking about it in relationship to my previous career. There it was big oil and how big oil interacts with government and those relationships. And then here it was the government and the defense industrial complex. And we had this third component of the truth seekers, the UAP disclosure world that is part of it, is interjecting themselves in it, is investigating it. I don't know if they're doing all of those things or they're doing none of those things. I don't know if they think they're doing some of that stuff, but what definitely became apparent was, as you described it, this ecosystem that existed between the government, the community, and the key industrial players, let's say, who chime in or whose things people suspect it might be. So it was sort of this third component of the community that I think was most new and took more time to assess and understand and examine what that role is and what are the roles of the key people who are floating seemingly between all three, because that's essentially what I was doing in the oil and gas world, right? I was floating between, in this gray world, between the company that I was inside, the government that was the home government of that company, the country in which the company operated as a private entity, in the intelligence world that is sort of, so it was almost this Venn diagram of of competing yet complementary interests that I was living within. And I, it took me no time at all to recognize that that was the sort of dynamic that I thought was at play here. And then as I dove into it, I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely at play here.
So then, with that being said, how long specifically would you say that you've had this on your radar, this disclosure debacle?
I mean, really, I only came public or began being vocal in all of this in June of last year. And it probably took me less than a month because by mid-July I was like, oh yeah, there's some stuff here I need to start figuring out fast if I'm going to try and navigate this system, because just walking through the door and listening to what was being said was a lot different from the actions I was experiencing. And so then there's a gap. And so now you made me ask questions, and now I've got to chase those questions down. So yeah, I mean, it's going on. What's that real quick, man? 9 months.
Rather quick. So I would say you're pretty astute, Gene.
Well, fortunately, I retired. I retired in 2017. The papers, my father-in-law's work that launched me into this, landed in my lap in 2019. We didn't publish them till the end of 2024. And it was June 2025. I was like, okay, I guess I should have a press conference or something and announce these things and introduce them to the world.
Well, let's
So
jump on
nothing else to
that
do.
real quick, because there's a high probability that there's some folks listening that aren't that familiar with what brings you into the disclosure community. And if you could just fire that one across their bow and let people know what makes you interested in this topic.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, 2019, my father-in-law passed away in Kazakhstan. He's ethnically Russian. My wife is ethnically Russian, but was living in Latvia when we had met and got married and emigrated her to the U.S. in 2018. And shortly after he passed away, we discovered 119 pages of very dense, very detailed technical documentation, a lot of schematics, a lot of physics, a lot of writing. And the short of it is that it is describing his work and working through the reverse engineering of a UFO by his own words in those documents. And so from 2020 through the time we finally decided to translate and publish them in 2024, we had spent a lot of time just trying to figure out what they were, in the sense of, are they, is there a contribution to the academic discourse of science in some way? Is there something relevant to the UFO UAP community? As during that time, not that I was terribly interested in it outside of, I'll certainly watch some stuff on TV, but it was in no way engaged or knew any of the figures or any of the multitude of subjects that I've come to drink through a fire hose over the last 9 months. Or were they the ramblings of a madman and a quirky family heirloom that he might have worked on at his kitchen table? So that was, the thrust of it. And as we got, particularly 2022 to 2024, I started realizing there is something to them. They are related to a number of U.S. government programs. It was statistically beyond coincidence that they would be, right? And the simplest adage that I use is, when a set of documents drops on your lap from a foreign country, nothing in them should reflect anything if you put them against declassified programs from the United States government. But when I took this random set of documents and just sort of started looking, is there anything else that talks about this kind of stuff? And all the usual suspects jump right to the top of the pecking order: Air Force Propulsion Labs, DIA, NASA, Bigelow, AAWSAP, ATIP, figure the odds at that point. Yeah, so, at 2024, I was finally like, we're not going to get any help with this. So we just got to put it out there and see if somebody notices it and knows what it is, and see if it's useful to anybody.
So what would you say was like the first connection that you made when you went public, so to say? Like, how did you attempt to, I guess, break into the conversation?
Attempt to break into the conversation. Yeah, I mean, it was, well, when I did the press conference, I framed it around these documents, and at that time, I think it was only about 40 U.S. government programs that I was able to relate them to. I'm up to about 75 now at this point. And the main one that kept coming up was AAWSAP, Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, and Bigelow Aerospace, and the NASA BPP program. Those were the two that were consistent. Oh, along with the Pays patents, Salvatore Pays, which again had some derivative of the DIRDs in relationship to the DIRDs. So those were the ones that, no matter which direction I went in, it kept coming back to a combination of those three. One of the, again, not knowing anybody in the space or who to turn to, once I went through the local academic community and contacts, we had casually, through Nat's work, she works as an IT engineer along with being a opera singer. She had people who had some scientific backgrounds who looked at some of it. I had some friends in Europe who were associated with the European Space Agency. So they were, And again, you don't want to send everybody UFO stuff. So I just sent them pages of the physics, the math is like, does this check out? Is it logical? And, everybody's, oh, yeah, it's older, it's whatever. And then, obviously with it having the UFO drawing right there with him, as much as he was talking about it, the inevitable time came where it's like, well, I've got to reach out and find these key people in the UFO community. So, I hit up everybody in the Ancient Aliens crowd because that was the show I had watched anyway that I knew everybody from. Nick Pope was the only one who wrote back. And when I wrote them, I was just like, listen, this stuff dropped in my lap. Do you know a Russian physicist or Russian ufologist who might be able to give some insights? I'm happy to buy a cup of coffee, dinner, lunch, whatever. Nick wrote back right away saying it was fascinating. He didn't know anybody. I reached out, George Knapp, obviously, do a simple internet search. He comes right to the top of the list. And, obviously his Russian connections or connections to Russia and all that has come out after my stuff has come out, or really come to the forefront once again, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
He brought it out in the 90s, to be fair. But it's certainly found a resurgence in recent history. Again, pinging them with emails, essentially just asking that question. Can you make anything of it? If not, do you know somebody, who
Yep.
would be willing to have a look? That's, because that fundamental question was still there for me. Something worth of value to humanity, or crazy guy writing, and, it's a quirky thing we stick on the bookshelf.
Totally understood. Yep. I'm of a similar path of just trying to get guidance from folks that I perceived should be in the know. And yeah, it's been very interesting trying to go through these types of associations and connections and learn the things that we're learning. So,
Right.
back to the disclosure debacle circus.
Yeah, well, and that's what I think, again, and it's similar to your story. It's where there are people who are positioned themselves as the champions, who put out the calls for witnesses, who put out the calls for evidence and all the rest of it. And you're like, well, this looks like some pretty good stuff. I don't know exactly what it is, but I've put a lot of work into it. I can walk anybody through these connections, and again, in a logical, professional, analytical way. My background, right? I'm not, just somebody saying, screaming, I found UFO papers here, and it's, a Betty Crocker, oven bake that I didn't see in the 1970s, and I've misidentified what's in the papers, right? So there's, some structure there, and I put in the work to kind of make it easy, or at least make it falsifiable to some degree. And yeah, these champions just seem to have other interests, and those other interests behooved me, let's say, based upon the quality or the falsifiability of the things they're putting forward. And I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's safe to say from your previous tradecraft skills that you could, at the very least, with all modesty, because it's your work, but you can still appreciate that, there's you have the ability to ascertain that there's intelligence of value worthy of looking further, and you are putting this effort up against other work that I would at least say is of questionable value as it's being paraded in front of the community, so to say, that whole disclosure economy. What you were referring to as champions of these topics may seem that way initially, right? I get that. I feel like I fell for that too. Like, you're trying to connect to the right people, but then in due time, myself personally, and I believe you did also, start to realize that these champions of truth are more like gatekeepers, controllers of the narrative. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And I look back on my, again, drawing from my career and my experience. And you're right, and intelligence is much different from law enforcement investigations, or investigations you would do when you're bringing something to trial, right? We don't have to prove innocence or guilt. We need to
Right.
have confidence in the information. And my role was always to, collect that information and to assess it and to present it to the decision makers for them to decide, is this actionable? And so I'm very much used to, presenting things, and they say, okay, well, this isn't that high of a priority now. We're going to push this down the line, or, it kind of sits there until other things come in. So I guess if I thought about it in terms of the community and gatekeepers and all the rest of it, that yes, I was trying to present some decision makers with this information. And it wasn't just that it was whether it was a pushback on, this other thing is more important now, priorities, or more pressing things, or things that move the needle. As we say, it's competing in against other information or other evidence that has arrived that is actually moving the needle, that is adding value to the disclosure movement and conversation and activities. What got me was that there was no discussion at all. That it was, here's the information for you upon which to make your decision. Nothing.
Yeah, it's wild. And I try to tell folks that the show that they're seeing from the audience's perspective, the end user, the purchaser,
Yes.
in the disclosure economy, is very different, because they're not actively involved like someone like yourself, who's trying to get information out there and is assessing, why is my information not given the same scrutiny? Like there's a lot of inconsistencies in the scrutiny, as you have mentioned before, that there's like different factions, tracks in this, and there's different levels of scrutiny being applied. And it's unfortunate, because from the audience's perspective, I don't think they realize how much they're shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
By not, how would I put this, maintaining appropriate levels of discernment, by applying the correct amount of scrutiny liberally against all factions, tracks, information, that there's disparity, which is causing a dilemma.
Yeah, well, it's the architecture of the system that's here, right? And if we really strip it down bare bones, what we're talking about is people who are monetizing the mystery, for whom resolution is not the goal. It is the pursuit of a resolution that is the goal.
Yes.
It's reality TV, and the audience is a participant, is an active participant in this show. It's just all not necessarily packaged into one broadcast. It's distributed amongst many broadcasts. And anybody, I think, coming into it, or and I don't even fault necessarily the players, or some of the players, because it's the system itself, the structure itself, that rewards pursuing the truth, or that rewards the pursuit of a resolution versus rewards actually coming to a resolution, or rewards, monetizing mystery rather than being transparent and moving the needle. And all of those things are in conflict with one another. And I think, as we talked and prepared for this, it's, how do we help the audience not just better discern the information that they're consuming, but what role does the audience have in correcting course, in de-incentivizing the pursuit of the resolution, and incentivizing things that actually get us to resolution.
It's a great point, and I often wonder that, Gene, is what about the relationship between the audience and the distributors of information? They say, be the change that you want to see in the world. How do you recommend that the audience changes the way that they engage with the distributors, as I put it. You know, that's because I do believe you're right. There's responsibility by all of these parties in how this is playing out.
Yeah.
And as much as, I mean, I don't like blame the audience. Like, it's not all their fault, but I can't look at this honestly and say that they are not part of the problem in as so far as, you know, if you're not going to complain about the way things are happening, you can't really expect them to get better.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
there's something that has to change. Like, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, it's tough because now the entire disclosure economy, let's say 90% of it, 95, 90, is based online, right? And the algorithms drive primarily what gets amplified. We know there's ways to massage those algorithms in different ways, and we can get into some of that with the marketing and the networks that sort of support one another in terms of who are the gatekeepers and things like that. So, what can the audience do, though? And it's a tough position because, number one, you don't necessarily control what pops up as you're scrolling. There's time limits on, how quickly people engage with things that tell the algorithm whether, it's going to keep promoting it and whatnot. Again, people blindly just like and blindly just share because it's a favorite person or, preferred character, or the headline is something that resonates with them, regardless if the content actually lives up to the headline, as we know some people are infamous for. There's a far disparity between the headline and what the content actually delivers. And then even in terms of viewing the content and commenting on it, the algorithm does not determine whether it's a positive or a negative comment. It's a comment. And so there are people who, not just in this space, across the board, will actively post things and create media that they know is going to be negatively received. They don't care that it's negatively received. They don't care that it's misinformation. They don't care if it, the headline matches the content, because the first person that gets on there and tells them that they're stupid and 400 other people get underneath it, either echoing that they're stupid or fighting about whether or not the person is stupid, is all engagement, and the algorithm doesn't discern itself. It just sees, this is something people like to engage with. I'm going to continue to push it out and share it and, find people who are like these people who comment blindly in an emotional rage, and, and it continues to propagate that way. And then it winds up in the same way that, people who do look to use this media for a diversity of opinions and ideas, or to keep up with, the topics and this and that, it winds up in front of us too. I guess I put myself in that group since I said us, and then it's like, okay, I can discern between this and, move on. But again, I always find it's not worth the hype that seemed to have gone in it, and the amplification that it receives, both organically and by design.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important thing to point out, is that I think so much of what we're seeing is completely by design. Extremely contrived. Lots of collaboration in wild ways. Like, as I'm sure you're familiar with it, there's direct collusion, collaboration, conspiracy that can be going on, but there's a lot of side activities that can be beneficial to the grander deception, but people don't necessarily have to be as actively willing participants. That this is how complex things can get. The concept of useful idiots gets thrown around in the tradecraft that you used to be a part of. And I don't think people really appreciate how easy it is to manufacture and manipulate those roles, I don't necessarily want to go after, people personally, so to say, because it almost doesn't even matter. One of the things for the research that you fired across my bow that I found very interesting was that aspect, that we don't need to identify the individuals and even address them as individuals once we realize there's a network of roles and bad actors.
Exactly.
We can very much just concentrate on the network of them that exist. And at that point, I mean, names and faces and histories are almost irrelevant.
They are, because again, it's that structure that incentivizes it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you are somebody who has a desire to be in the entertainment business, if you are just a content creator, and you have an interest or you have found your foothold in this subject matter, well, the community has created that space for you to exist and thrive and prosper, right? Because it doesn't demand accountability, and I'd say that's the number one thing when it comes to the major figures and claims that they make and things like that, is that the community has let's say a varying degree of standards when it comes to accountability, right? Or they'll have personal preferences on which figures they demand more accountability of than others, and what they'll excuse and what they won't excuse, and what is forgivable and what is not forgivable. And everybody seems to apply that through their own lens of personal experience or affection, for wherever it is that information is coming from. And so right, on the one hand, the individuals are symptoms of the bigger structural problem. They are irrelevant, because if it wasn't them, it would just be somebody else who would try to step into that space. But again, without the consumer being aware and making a conscious decision, being intentional about what it is they're going to give their energy to, right? Because I don't think there's a lot of people who come into this for entertainment. I think most people come into it because they want to learn about the subject matter, right? And learning should be entertaining. There can be balances there. And I think there are other people who aren't here for the information, but to investigate and research for whatever reason, whether they're an experiencer themselves and they're trying to come to terms with their experience, or they just find the subject matter fascinating, or they've had some other proximity to it. So there's a wide spectrum of people who consider themselves researchers and investigators into the material, and then others who, like us, have come into it because we are contributors, right? So I guess that's fair. We have people, entertainment, researchers, contributors. I don't know if there's another category you can think of.
Yeah, there's just more and more factions that seem to be worthy of titles the longer you pay attention to this stuff. Right. One of the things I was thinking about too, Gene, is I think that you and I function from a bit of a different perspective. I'm sure you've seen that image before, where they show different perspectives, that there's an object, from one perspective it looks like a circle and you shine a light on it, but then the image on the wall makes it look square, but then the light shine the light the other way and it looks like a circle, So perspective does matter in this stuff. Yep. And I feel like, for the most part, people in the audience, the end users, the receivers of this information, it's like they're looking for the truth from their perspective. And it's almost like they're looking upward, like, please tell me the truth, please tell me the truth. And they get an image of the situation. But someone like you, and I would say someone like myself also, from the weird programs that I've, associated with through the years, where I guess you're just more aware of the machinations that exist of deception, of cover-up, of narrative control, of secrecy, of compartmentalization. So in a way, it's like, you have one group of people, they look up and they try to see something. And I feel like we're coming from a direction where we're looking down at that same point that they're looking at,
Right.
but from a different perspective.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah,
you and I,
absolutely.
it's so easy to see that, oh, this is deception, this is sensationalism, this is unsubstantiated speculation, this is more unsubstantiated speculation. So in ways, I guess I can appreciate that the perspective of the audience can't really see it any other way.
No, and I guess, I mean, it's almost like being in having a friend who's in an abusive relationship, right? I mean, you see as an outsider, you see what's going on, and they call you up and say, "Oh, oh, she stood me up again tonight." And it's like, well, yeah, you don't know she's a stripper, or, whatever. Like the glitter and cheap whatever it was. It's like we can see it, and they're just focused on the bigger thing of, well, I'm in love and I'm in a relationship, and so I'll just deal with everything else underneath it. And then as they sit there complaining about it, where you're like, well, yeah, yes, it's a problem, and you can do something about it, but they don't.
Yeah.
They don't want to do it. They like rather complain about it than do anything about it.
Right. Yes, correct.
You know?
People don't want to do, right? They don't want to take action. This frustrates me. You're a man of action. I'm a man of action. And I see the audience, and it's like, every time Lou Elizondo comes out with another bogus image that he's going to have to apologize for, people just keep discussing it. They keep creating content. Like you said earlier, that it doesn't, as far as the algorithm is concerned, every single time somebody makes a post about Lou Elizondo, even with a fake picture, even technically that level of content creation is algorithmically supporting him being presented to a broader audience.
Yeah. And, and I'll say to people, and Lou's a good example. He's a controversial figure. He's a polarizing figure within some groups, and to me, there's no bad information, right? If he puts out 50% good stuff and 50% bad stuff, that's good information. If every 10th thing he puts out is debunked, that's good information to have. That's good information to know. Doesn't mean, I have to dislike him as a human being or whatever, because again, he's part of this ecosystem that has been developed like anybody else who is coming out, any of the whistleblowers for any of the ways that and channels that they have used to come out. Maybe that's that fourth pillar that, I missed earlier, is that government side of this, and the narrative control, and these words that you use, useful idiot. And, I always like to say that is a term of art. It's not an insulting thing or speaking to somebody's intelligence, but it is just that idea that somebody is, able to be used in a way that is useful to somebody else without them knowing, that is useful to the intelligence apparatus, and they don't realize they're being useful to the intelligence apparatus, unless that's one of the things that motivates them, right? And you always have to look at that in these individuals, right? Number one question, we say it all the time in government, we say it all the time in so many other things: follow the money. Follow the money. When the journey of discovery is somebody's bread and butter, you can bet your ass nothing is ever going to be discovered. It will just be one long ass journey to get, get nowhere. Right. A Curse of Oak Island. Like, I love that show. If you've ever seen it, I love that show. I love that story, all of the things. You can't tell me with today's technology can't just, again, I've been in the oil and gas business. I see the drilling they're doing. You could have solved that already. Maybe it already has been solved. I don't know.
I've seen
But
some pretty serious pumps that I think could suck that freaking hole dry.
yeah, right. If we had the Hecker Sticco drilling exploration company,
Mm-hmm.
we'd have that thing done in 45 days, and we would know for sure. They've carried on that series for they've carried on the series for I don't know how many years.
Right.
And never mind the legend itself is gone for 100 years. It's the journey.
I wanted to jump back in regards to when you were discussing like Lou Elizondo and the information that he puts out there. And I do agree with you that there is value to all information, right? But it requires discernment on the receiver.
Yeah.
So in one breath, like I can appreciate you say, like, hey, if 50% of the information Lou puts out is no good and 50% is good, like that's still all good info. And I'll agree with that general situation.
Yeah.
But then when we observe a community that every time he puts stuff out, they're giving it great value for its accuracy, avoiding criticizing the pictures that are of little to no value. I mean, because this is an activity we're witnessing, right? And I find it problematic because I think of it being like whether you're a plumber, a pizzeria, if whatever you do, if 50% of the time you flub it, you're not that good at what you do. That's also being honest.
Yeah, but then it's about the intention, right?
Well,
And
these are fair questions, right? So now,
it's about that whole framing,
right?
If your intention is to give enough as to what and considering the online aspects of this, it is to your advantage to put something out that gets a 50-50 split of is it real or is it not, because it gets everybody engaged in it.
Well, then to me, that just screams of a covert operation being applied. It just screams of it, because if my goal is, if I'm presenting to the general public as somebody who's a champion of the truth, my belief is that person intends to do it 100% of the time.
Right.
But if you're then telling me that that same person who attempts to portray themselves as a complete champion of the truth, but then blatantly is sewing in less than accurate information, that to me is just someone who's disingenuous, who is compromised, who's choosing to collaborate or suffering under operating in the position of being a useful idiot.
Right. I mean, and which begs the question, is it an independent commercial enterprise to be a figure, or is it somehow being directed through a government structure who is interested in controlling the narrative? And, it's difficult, I think, in many circumstances to distinguish between the two, because we get to a point where the money trail stops, right? And it's like, now where does it go from here? We don't know. These are kind of the options, and we basically have to go into a holding pattern and wait and listen and try and dissect and pull out any cues or clues that gives us that broader understanding. And again, from my experience in oil, gas, government, and intelligence, those waters can be intentionally murky.
Mm-hmm. So now when we're even discussing this as, again, so many factions involved, I don't think people really have a grasp on how many factions are involved. Some of the research you fired in my direction shows that we could take the majority of these factions and reduce them into about 3 different tracks, 3 different groups, organizations collaborating, however you want to look at it. But with that being said, so now, what you're suggesting in, what would be considered like, the government whistleblower environment with, Lou Elizondo, and we can sit here and point fingers, criticize, ask questions, wonder how these connections are made for this group of factions. But then there's another group of factions that you had identified as more of a commercial arm to this. And
Yeah.
in that, so with all of this stuff being said, I'm basically setting up that I agree with you. If we could start to find the upper management of these factions,
We're
right?
going to be
Because
the Karens of disclosure.
right.
We want to talk to your manager.
Yes, I want to talk to your manager. Where did you get this photograph from? But this is really important because I think, as we were talking before, that there's different perspectives at play here. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that from the perspective of the end user in the audience, it may be more challenging for them to see the activity as the happenstance of many individual disassociated groups operating individually. And I can't even begin to share that perspective. The amount of collaborating and collusion that I see from my perspective is off the wall. So I think it's very important that for us to present to the public that there absolutely is something from their perspective that they're missing. And in regards to the commercial side, you had just brought this to my attention recently. And I think this is disgustingly huge and important. But the topic of this pursuing X, that there's marketing groups that are running around behind the scenes, and that in and of itself speaks volumes that what we're seeing is networked intention being applied and distributed from an upper management, that we can follow the money.
Yeah.
That we can find collusion and conspiracy. So talk to me, talk to the audience, everybody here at One Spark. I mean, what is going on with this aspect that most people might not be aware of? What is pursuing X, and how is it integrated into this community, most likely unbeknownst to most people?
Yeah, so, I like the way you structured this because, again, we're talking about the commercialization of the issue. And it's an important distinction because, as we've been talking about, it speaks to the financial aspects as part of the motivation of whomever you are listening to and whatever it is you're absorbing. And, and first and foremost is the idea, none of it needs to be conspiratorial or illegal or wrong or even immoral. This is the business of the UAP disclosure economy. And, and hey, listen, hats off to anybody who finds their niche, right? And finds their field that they can apply their trade and be prosperous in. But I think what's important for the audience is that where we are talking about transparency, where we're talking about interfaces with government officials, decision-making, legislative bodies, we are, there is a movement here where we are, petitioning the government for things. And so what is crossing lines between commercialization and marketing of individuals and personalities and their publics and their products? And is that bleeding over into actually lobbying and actually creating legislation or creating things that are going to profit those people at some point? So that's an area of concern. And are we missing out on moving that needle towards resolution because resolution is not profitable? And so we are missing opportunities for what it is we say we want to get done because there are forces at play that have a vested monetary interest in things not being resolved. So, to particularly Pursuing X. So Pursuing X is the only marketing company that operates and focuses on the UAP issue. They're best well known. They are the producers, co-promoters of Contact in the Desert, which has become the premier product, right? Because again, we're talking about marketing, right? Contact in the Desert is a product, and it is the top tier premium, experience product for the whole thing. The thing everybody wants to aspire to be at, place to be, and the place to be seen. And so then you have to look at who is, speaking there. Priority X is a marketing company. They have clients for whom they market and do their promotion and things like that. So I think it would very much make sense and be, part of the standard business model that the vast majority of speakers that you are going to hear at Contact are going to be clients of that marketing company, because they want to make sure their people are getting out there and getting the attention. And and from that attention and from those videos and from the photos everybody posts, they're going to be amplifying those posts and those feeds. They're going to be, sharing them. And again, all that becomes part of the monetization stream. And again, all fair and well. Does that equate to the public getting the best evidence available? Does that equate to that the event or the people and the key personalities that we are listening to, how does that move the needle? And that's where the disconnect comes, right? And then we just circle around and we get ready for next year. So, if you have your, marketing budget, Eric, as Eric Hecker whistleblower, and you have marketing money to spend, then your evidence will suddenly have a much different priority in the discussion and in the world, because you are now able to have it placed into the discussion, right? So what are we doing? We're doing product placement, like anyone's doing in, films and all the rest of it.
This chat has been brought to you by my coffee.
Right. So, this is where, again, somebody's making good business. A lot of people are making good business. The people who are engaging this company and want to make sure their books are getting sold, that they have speaking engagements, right? It's tough to get a speaking engagement when you don't have a, history of speaking engagements to tell other people, right? Italia in the opera, music, and comedy world, it's tough to rent a 10,000 seat stadium, if you haven't sold out a 5,000 for 100 seat seat facility. It's the exact same thing. So I guess to try and bring it full circle again, it comes down to this idea of the discernment of, do we know that we're getting, and that the best information, evidence, and witnesses have a way to be heard, versus we're just getting what we are given, because through these structures and formats and relationships, there's both organic, support and amplification that goes out, as well as more contrived and structured, marketed content that goes out, and again, I can't stress it enough, because listen, right? I love to give Eric Hecker a plug. I love to share his things where I can. I do it with all of the people with whom I have developed a relationship, and I want to see them, get them introduced to the broader community, because I think they say something valuable, or they present information in a good, healthy, productive way. They align with, I guess, the values and things like that. But when it's being marketed to you, you don't necessarily know if it's aligning with your values, because you don't have full transparency of whether you are, if you're just listening to a sales pitch or you're listening to evidence.
Yeah, it kind of makes me just, my brain immediately goes to, like, in one, like right here, like, you're talking, I'm talking, I represent me, you represent you. To me, that's a bit more open and honest, than these other individuals and factions that aren't being as transparent, that, we don't realize how much these people are investing to make sure that they're at the podium, that they're in the spotlight.
Right.
I mean, so like,
Well,
right off
it's
the
pay to
bat,
play, you know?
yeah, it's totally pay to play, which I think the audience may lack an appreciation of that reality because they're following this circus under the false pretense that the information being spotlighted is placed there because of its veracity.
Right. Yeah.
Which is problematic.
It is. And, and if, and the more you look into it, when these networks are combinations of, expertise and witnesses and, the scientists and the media is interwoven in there, right? If you're part of the same marketing group and you are a witness, do you stand up to the same scrutiny as somebody who's not? Do you, number one, do you even get a time slot, right? Do you even get selected to be amplified? And that's something, in the course of my investigation that, it was one of the things that was initially raised to me, about pursuing X in the network and, some of the people that are in there, that there's an email chain that circulates around about who's going to get amplified. At first I was like, oh, okay, well, how's that work? And then I started seeing it in practice, again, particularly on X, because you see, personality number one, oh, I got to give a shout out to so-and-so. They're doing such great work. And and once you see that a couple of times, you're like, oh, okay,
they're all on the same network.
That's what your monthly retainer got you, was a shout out by a key figure about the great work that you're doing.
It appears to me, unfortunately, that because of the existence of these collaborations, to put it nicely, that it absolutely is kind of stonewalling. Because they're working together, they have an agenda, they have profit margins, that if you happen to come up against one of these groups, if your information happens to be contrary to theirs, you're now a business opponent.
Well, right. I mean, you wind up again not getting in the circle, right? Not getting in the old boys club because you're because you're not in there, because you're not part of the pay to play, or they didn't select you or reach out to you because it conflicts with somebody who's already in there.
Right.
And you don't want that happening. And, and again, right, standard business practice, nothing conspiratorial or whatever. But this is where we have to ask ourselves, or the audience has to ask ourselves, what are you doing here and why? Right. And when you add to that the bigger picture, that the same figures are the ones sitting on panels with sitting members of Congress. Do these members of Congress have full visibility and transparency that the 5 people around them, or the people that they always talk to, or are they, that there is a commercial marketing element involved in this that is ultimately feeding information that is going to feed legislative efforts? And if you ask me, that's going into lobbying, right? You were doing it very subtly. You were doing it, in a not so transparent way. But when we were talking about an issue that sole goal and focus is transparency, then everybody, whether you are, if you are a client of a marketing company, every piece of material that you put out should disclose that it should differentiate whether that it is a marketing piece, right? When you are appearing on a panel and you are part of a marketing organization that is the organizer of that event,
And everybody else
That's
on the panel is also in a business relationship with the marketing company.
whatever.
Little
You
details
put
matter.
but
Every
they do,
one of
right.
us is here because Pursuing X put this event together and is our marketing representative. Yeah, like that level of clarity matters.
Right. I mean, then it's a fan event. Then it is then it's essentially UFO Comic-Con.
Gene, one
right?
might consider that withholding that information is indicative of nefarious intentions.
I mean, whether it's indicative of nefarious intentions, whether it is recognition that the event might then be viewed differently and not organic or not providing the best information or the latest information or the most scrutinized. But this is, again, it's about that, whether anybody on those panels are there to hold one another accountable or to just amplify and market one another.
Makes me wonder, Gene,
that's
when
a
we,
huge
when we consider an entity like Pursuing X, this is interesting as my brain is running with this. So we have the people that they represent, right? Everybody's working together and they look like faction, which would be that commercial arm that you were mentioning.
Yeah.
And the government arm exists.
Just like a record company.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yep. But now
Sign artists, the label, but everyone does their own thing.
and everybody who's represented by Pursuing X has a limited amount of information and understanding of the dynamic, and let's just say from a certain perspective are involved in a need-to-know basis. Now I'm imagining more behind the scenes, right? So let's say, and this is just hypothetically speaking, spitballing stuff, right? Is it impossible to consider that Pursuing X in and of itself could be, let's just say, lobbied by either the government arm that has a vested interest in how this information is put to market, and or let's just say military industrial complex corporations that manufacture things may have a few bucks to lobby a group like Pursuing X, which has gathered up voice pieces and an audience, right? That things could be even more complex. Maybe maybe those contractors are throwing money in to control the narrative, to paint a picture that covers liability. Maybe the government's throwing money at them because they want to feign transparency. I mean, there are potentials for this to be more nefarious in even more complex ways.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, there's the, as you laid out, the idea of a third party / independent organization that, whether they had seed funding or whether they had connections, introductions, got those first few key clients to begin building the roster, or somebody was, as again they used to do in the oil and gas world, that encourage you to go start a company, for government contracts. And then you found it awfully easy to get government contracts awarded to you as a subprime. So it's not unheard of. It's definitely a standard practice. It puts a layer of plausible deniability
Bingo.
between the government and the media figures. And again, it gives you one point of entry through which to circulate information instead of trying to manage 10, 20, or 30 individual creators. It's one email.
Yes.
That's government's all about efficiency.
Yes. It also makes me wonder if this Pursuing X organization, it also seems to kind of fit the bill for what people have called in the past like a cutout. I mean, my understanding is the people that are running Pursuing X have a history that's a little bit shady, which might be the type of person that somebody might tap and say, hey, we got this little project.
We got this little project.
For you. We need a narrative manufactured. Yeah. Can you find folks for us? Can you manipulate this topic? Can you market them? Can you put on an event?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
This all seems to have a high potential for complex structuring to have been applied.
It does, and again, it's it is not at all without precedent. And, as you pointed out, when it comes to intelligence and it comes to developing assets, that is the number one thing that they look for, is how compromisable are you, and how are we able to use that. Now, again, for transparency and the rest of it, right, Pursuing X, the founders, they have written openly, though not widely. It's not a headline, let's say, that's easily found in anything. But the company, they were former felons that had convictions for Security and Exchange Commissions type fraud in Arizona. They found reintegration into society and business opportunities limited for them after they served their time and paid their dues back to society. And they decided to start this company to focus on marketing efforts for underrepresented communities and issues and all the rest of it. And the UAP,
And they found some nobility in the middle of all of this.
And they found, and the UAP issue happened to be one of those unrepresented issues which I guess seemed to need marketing help in order to be brought to the foresight. I mean, I would imagine there's a dozen or 100 or 1,000 other issues.
Sounds like they were looking for a market that hadn't been dominated yet.
Potentially.
Right? I mean, just sounds like a standard business maneuver. Like, hey, there's underinvestment in this arena, so therefore there's also not enough return on investment by definition.
Well, and you either land on that because you yourself are already a fan of the issue, or somebody has come to you and told you, here is a underrepresented market, and this is why it's important to go after. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that becomes, plenty of underrepresented issues, underrepresented markets, and all the rest of it. But to see a business opportunity to develop a 5-year plan, you have to know that market is going to grow.
And you probably need 5 years of investment available.
Right.
I mean, a benefactor shows up and goes, I got 5 years of budget for you.
Listen.
What can you accomplish?
My second, or what I intended to be my primary career or my primary activity in retirement was opera and producing operas and all the rest of it. That's underrepresented when it comes to the music industry. Mm-hmm. Now it's consistent. It's a 400-year-old plus art form. Consistently on music platforms, there's a consistent 4%, following, right? So there are generational aspects, people dying off, people coming in. It's just not an old person. So there's definitely a good, steady business model for the opera, but nobody wants to take on marketing opera, right? Because it's been 400 years and it's steady at 4%. UAP has been 80 years. And so what information, what market indication was there when the company was started that this was on an upwards trajectory, as opposed to was going to be the same as it was for the last 70 years?
What makes me laugh on this one, Gene, is I
don't have the answers to it.
I often think of Newton's laws of motion as being a standard for observation of things, right? So it looks to me like the topic of UFOs and UAP for, let's say, 80 years, all investments have been for the purpose of deception. Until such time you show me that there's been investment applied to the contrary.
No,
that's what I see as the ball.
I'm hard pressed to come up with a contrary,
right? Like that ball has been in motion and will continue until equal and opposite force is applied, and I'm not seeing it.
Well,
I'm seeing money. I'm seeing money invested to deceive people, and that seems to be the precedent that has been set. I hope to see evidence to the contrary in the not too distant future, but I think there's way too many factions vying to be king of the hill on this particular topic now. I think more people are getting interested in investing.
Yeah.
But it's because of the potential returns on the investment versus the distribution of truth.
Right. Well, and let's face it, the returns on the investment are going to be, 100% on the technological side,
Mm-hmm.
right? Being a UFO ufology historian
Mm-hmm.
is going to be of little to no value because, again, the record will be set straight, hopefully, as things come out. And, all of these, figures who are making a career out of the pursuit of the resolution, as opposed to trying to get to resolution or achieving resolution, will just die on the vine as it goes along. But I think, I agree, and I to your point of the history of investment being in deception, it begs the question: if we believe, if we see what is happening now as a path that is being carved towards disclosure, and the efforts of the people being coordinated on that path to disclosure are for the greater good of disclosure, does that does not necessarily mean we are not still being deceived along that path, that we are still being denied information and evidence and discussion and debate to get us there. It does not negate or mean that that our government officials are not being influenced or lobbied through an organized efforts whose purposes are purely of commercial interest. Right? Who they want to be there because they want it to be their book or their thing, that
or their retirement job when they get out of politics,
their retirement job, or
now they're at Lockheed,
or on that commission that goes and greets the aliens on the lawn, and all the rest of it. So
the future in lobbying.
Right. So a lot of complex competing interests that, again, are just purely commercial, purely good business, right? They're making good business. Doesn't mean that makes for good disclosure.
Right. And I mean, it makes me think of tradecraft and stuff, right? I mean, as a plumber, I can go out and provide good business all day and make $1 million.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean I'm giving the greatest plumbing job to the client.
Right.
One doesn't mean the other.
3 days.
Right.
Get business again.
I mean, I was raised on Long Island. We would hear this regularly where I came from, was you can be a good man or a good businessman, but you can't be both.
Right.
It's just you got to take your pick. And this is what I see when it comes to the business of disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
It very much seems to be a business, as we've been discussing here today. It is the business of disclosure, and there are many people vying for that money.
Yeah. And and again, to circle it back, that it is that way because of the structure and the architecture of it, right? That there's no place, there is really no place to independently to bring evidence to, right? There's no. I took my stuff and if I knew of Arrow and made a phone call and brought it in there, then that would have been the end of that, and it never would have gotten out, never would have entered the discussion and all the rest of it.
Yep.
And again, the criticisms, why didn't I publish a scientific paper? Because I'm 49 years old and not a physicist to be able to, publish a university paper. Had no interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
Still don't have any interest in publishing a university. I'm not going to go learn physics, and I'm not going to,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've like I say, I play one on TV now. I've learned what I've learned out of, out of necessity of doing this. And it's like, well, all I can do is try and publish it. Right. And not going to farm it around, trying to get in advance. I just self-published it, put it out there. You want it. It's there. I continue to do the work on it. Working on, again, now a documentary, because, again, nobody wants to actually read anything. Nobody wants to actually roll up there, and do the work. So you've got to find these ways to do it. Mm-hmm. And then I'm faced with the same decision.
Have you tried reducing everything into a 30-second short clip?
Right. Yeah, I've tried that. Doesn't you just can't. I can't make it work.
How about
I
a
can't make it
meme?
work.
A
But
single.
I can't make it work. Here's the problem. I can't make it work in a way that's honest
Mhm.
and is true to what the materials are and represent.
Right.
So I either have to be straightforward and give a, based on assessment, this is what I believe this is. And, here's 3 highlights. Maybe I can get that on a, TikTok size screen, but that's probably too much writing to begin with anyway, or I can just be like Soviet UFO reverse engineering exposed and then let everybody fight about whether it actually is or isn't, right?
Mhm.
I don't have the, like, I couldn't sleep at night with the just trying to be a bullshitter and saying something super extraordinary, a claim that could not be backed up, as opposed to, listen, it's heavy, it's dense, it takes time, you got to understand it, and it is what it is. And again, not looking to be an author. None of my income is dependent. My life is not dependent on any of this. What I do for fun, for interest. Working on the documentary now, which hopefully will come out. Might submit it to some film festivals and things like that for shits and giggles. But, if I want to play, I got to go hire a marketing firm. If I want to go to play, if I want to play just in this space, I only have one firm I can go to. Or got to bootstrap it. I've got to grassroots it. I've got to be honest and transparent and act with some integrity, for the purpose of it. And what's the purpose? What's the end goal? I think there's stuff in here that Congress needs to look at. I think they need to understand it. They need to be informed by it. I fall back to, that is what that's what my life was. And I did it with Senate staffers. I did it in the oil and gas world. That's the funny thing. After 9/11, new regulations were coming out and all the rest of it. What was I doing? I was preparing things. I was taking Senate staffers on tours of facilities to say, here's the facilities, here's the vulnerabilities, here's the things that the company can handle. This is what we need the government to do about the rest. This is the relationship that needs to develop between the government and the industry when it comes to terrorism and all of that. Was essentially looking to do the same thing in this space. Here's this information. I think there's a lot of value to it. I am informing you as the congressional representatives of the myriad of ways that this opens up to pursue the things that you are pursuing, and leave it, to your good hands and judgment to make a decision on how it's doing it. But there's that structure in place, Eric, that's already occupied by people who want to be the Russian UFO expert.
Yes.
That slot's already taken.
Correct.
The guy with Russian UFO documents slot has already been filled.
Correct.
So somebody in the space with other Russian UFO docs, somebody even though they relate to the other ones, it's problematic. I
totally get that one. So I came into the community similarly in as so far as when I showed up, there were already Antarctica experts around, Gene.
Right.
A whole bunch of people that have never been there.
It's been on the map a long time.
And a rich person that went there as a tourist and got the United States Antarctic program spiel shoved down their throat.
Yep.
And then and those people, if I'm not mistaken, are affiliated either with the marketing group that you mentioned or are their own marketing group and publishing company anyhow, profiteering off of these topics.
Yeah. And again,
and since I went against them, right? Since I didn't come into the arena agreeing with their position that was previously invested in, I'm a problem because I undermine their money stream.
Right.
I stand in defiance of any one of them being called an expert in Antarctica or anybody going to them for information on the topic. I find it ridiculous.
Yeah.
I would just as easily get information about the oil and gas industry from somebody at the gas pump next to me at the gas station and then ignore what Gene Sticco says. Because the guy at the gas pump says, I'm an expert on petroleum.
Right.
I pump gas. Been doing it my whole life.
Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I know how it gets. Okay. Good. Have at it.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, the community, we worry so much about who's a psyop and who's a government op. When the part of the reality of it might be that it's just a marketing op.
I think it's all. I think it's all of.
It
I
might
think
not
there's. I
even
think
be
there's.
that sexy.
I think it's all. I think it's all simultaneous activity. There's
Yeah.
absolutely a marketing op going on for the entities that you identified in affiliation. Worked perfectly.
Yeah.
There's also a government psyop going on. That's why this is super complex. All of these things are going on.
Yeah.
And then there's I think the only thing that you might have missed in that info you fired across me is the military industrial corporation complex contractors that are manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely have a vested interest in this conversation, and I'm curious where you think they would fit in, because they have to be similar to the oil industry. The oil industry has to be investing some money somewhere that's just straight up public relations. It's earmarked for, this is money for us to spend to make people think nice of us.
Yeah.
Right? They have a budget for that. So the companies, right? They have a budget for that, right?
Oh God, community is was it sustainable development? That was one of them. But
I once painted a school in a native Alaskan village because ConocoPhillips bought the paint,
right?
And I was mandatorily volunteered because the company that I worked for had contracts. Right. Yep. So next thing you know, I'm volunteered labor. And then next thing I know, there's a ConocoPhillips film crew sent there to make sure they take pictures of the paint that they donated.
That's gonna be a good. That's gonna be a good photo shoot somewhere.
Yeah,
it's gonna be in the archives.
It's out there.
Yeah,
me painting. But this is where it gets into, that these interests are all over the place. There's a lot of people that have motive to control the narrative. So even if there are aspects that are more or less benign and, simply standard corporate greed, we're familiar with that. Yeah. That's, to me, that just adds to the compartmentalization and levels of plausible deniability because of that existing. Everybody knows that exists.
Yeah.
But then there's the factions that are like, well, of course we know that exists. We know how to invest and manipulate that thing entirely.
Right. And that's what I wonder, to your point, your question of, what's the military industrial complex, position on it? And, I would say, to answer a question with a question is really the only thing I have, because I think it depends upon whether transparency opens a floodgate of new commercial opportunities to push out, to the broader public, or is the technology still at the stage that it's more profitable to continue to feed off government teats as opposed to trying to bring it to market? Is it still cost prohibitive to bring things to market? And so it's to their advantage that the secrecy remains.
I think it's loss of control prohibitive. I think, the control of the profiteering. I think there's so much money.
Engineer the reverse engineering.
Say this again.
When a smaller firm reverse engineers the reverse engineering.
Well, it's an access thing. I think
right.
It's just an access thing. It's monopolizing the technology. If they let the cat out of the bag, everybody gets a piece of this pie.
Yeah.
And
so think it's less about national security and showing our hand to the enemy.
Right. It's more about profiteering and maintaining a stranglehold on a certain amount of tech, because you're under no obligation.
Stranglehold over the agency with which you work on that tech with.
And you have a stranglehold on the reality of the people that want to live in a world of transparency, that want to reap the benefits of the advancement of man instead of suffering under these technologies that are, albeit monopolized, hidden, and therefore unregulated. There's a problem too right there.
Oh, that's a good point.
right?
Oh, if we have to
If we
regulate
don't
it.
know the tech exists, Gene,
Yeah.
it's not regulated. And if
Regulation costs money, Eric.
the,
When
and
something is regulated, that
uh,
adds to the bottom line.
I get that. I get that. But now, unregulated, that means whoever has the that which we shall not speak about can do that which we'll never know about.
Mm-hmm.
That to me, there's the devil in the details.
Yeah.
There's the least common denominator problem. When we reduce this all down, when we take this conversation of deception and potential technologies, the equation reduces to there seems to be a high level of technological advancement that a minority of people have access to,
Mm-hmm.
and we're simply supposed to trust that they will decide how best to apply that technology in the world around us.
Well, we know they'll apply it in the most profitable way.
And the best way for everyone, Gene.
No, right?
For all parties involved. They're
there's
going to
the
make the
free
world a
energy
better
question
place.
resolved. Why don't we have free energy? Because
Right.
it's not profitable to produce free energy for anybody.
Yeah, there's no financial incentive
Yeah.
to give people more than they can pay for. Right?
Well spoken.
Everybody says that we should, the technology should be given to, this is everybody should have this. And that makes me laugh because, nobody gets anything for free on this planet. We already have technological disparity, classes, so to say. You and I, we could sit here all day long and be like, I like to travel. And if they have the technology that can get me from Anchorage to Paris in 20 minutes to meet Gene for dinner, and we can do this all over the planet, how dare they withhold that technology from us?
Right.
Right? That's not right. But yet we can look at the vast majority of the planet and see that there's technology all over the face of the earth that many don't have. Call it indoor plumbing and electricity.
Right.
We already have technological classes, the haves and the have-nots. And it's not like at our level, Gene, that we're, raising funds to go plumb the planet, to bring technological equality to everyone.
Right.
So we won't champion it for them. The people above us won't champion it for them to push down to us. So now we just have to be concerned with those that have, and it's unregulated.
We have to depend upon their benevolence.
At least me having a toilet doesn't hurt someone that doesn't have a toilet.
Yeah.
It's one way of looking at it is, people will say, well, what's the big deal? It just, it's how you apply that unregulated tech to the world around you that matters.
Absolutely.
Jeez. But with that being said, we are it's so easy to talk to you forever, Gene, but I don't want to.
How long we got? We doing all right?
We're at 145.
All right.
So I can appreciate that you may or may not have other things to do, and I don't want to hold you forever. But it's always interesting talking with you because I think we're on the same page on so many things that it makes for an easy conversation. But with that being said, and being on the same page for certain things and conversations, I do want to bring to everybody's attention that the One Spark Network is in association, I guess you would say at the very least, with the Snippy event that is going on in Colorado, and that will be happening this August. Snippy 2026 will be from August 13th to August 16th during the new moon season, and it's a wonderful event. I've spoken at this event 2 years prior, and this will be my third year in a row speaking, and I'm very much looking forward to this because, as Gene and I were just discussing, there's a lot of controlled factions, and we, the people, need to break through this stuff. And I look at Snippy as an event and the folks that are running it as being folks of genuine interest to move the ball forwards. Are there fees for the tickets? Absolutely. But it's a matter of motive and intent. And these are the things that we should apply scrutiny to, as Gene and I were saying earlier.
And you are talking about it on OneSpark, and OneSpark is affiliated with
right,
Snippy.
right,
Right?
absolutely.
Everything's clear.
Everything's laid out, open and honest.
That's it.
So certainly I want people to go. I'll be speaking there, and just as we're planning things here, and you never know what becomes of stuff. But Gene had mentioned that he's interested in seeing about going to this event also, and my fingers are crossed that can be pulled off, because I've yet to meet Gene face to face. Very amicable online, but as everybody knows, it matters to meet people in real life. So
I could be a total jerk with a couple of drinks in me, and that's the end of the relationship.
You never know. You never know.
We could have a snippy throwdown might happen.
Next thing you know, we're wrestling in the bonfire. You never know what you're going to see under the stars in Mosca, Colorado.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I hope that you can make it out there. It would be really nice to cross paths with you, and then anybody else that might want to show up for the event. It's a fantastic event. It's an off-the-wall, beautiful environment, starry skies to the extreme. So it's a beautiful thing. And, I hope to see you there, Gene. Hope to see everybody there.
Hope to be there, absolutely.
But thank you, Gene, so much for your time. What are you working with that you might wish to plug for folks? I know you're doing some producing over there for Total Disclosure, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm helping out Ty Roberts with Total Disclosure podcast. He lives about 30 minutes from me, and he's interviewed me a few times, and I've seen how he struggled, and I just couldn't bear to watch anymore. I said, if you need an extra set of hands, I don't have anything else to do.
Nice.
So I'm helping him out on that side. Again, my father-in-law's translated works, engineeringinfinitybook.com. Everything is there for the public. So continuing to share that, lining up a few presentations. So going to start getting back out there again to continue to share the information and make it available to the public, to researchers, to anyone who wants to grab a hold of it and run with it and see what you can find. Have at it. That's what it's all about. You don't have to take my word for anything. You can throw everything I say out the window and start with the materials and see where they lead you for yourself if you're so inclined. Yeah, and we're putting together a short, a documentary to kind of really capture the story, because it is so dense and so complex, and even doing an interview exclusively about the book, you never hit everything that needs to be hit, and people only get bits and pieces. So we're hoping by condensing, I can't condense it into 30 seconds, but 45 to 60 minutes, I think we've got a good framework that will help people get their minds around it. And hopefully, within the next month or so, we'll be ready to premiere it. Excellent. It's good to hear, Gene. I'm glad things are moving on the up and up, getting the truth out there, fighting against all odds. That's it. And that is all brought to you by Gene Sticco's retirement fund. There you go. Please donate to buymeamansion.com. There's a link in the comments. It's right next to Buy Me a Maserati. Yeah. My tastes are more than coffee. Listen, it's the internet. Do you? Just do your thing. Why not? Yeah. You don't ask, nobody will give it to you. I had a blast during the whole affordable healthcare stuff, and I told people, I'm not really truly opposed to that. I said, but my priority in life is we have a right to bear arms. Yeah. So, if you got a right to healthcare, I believe we should be having, firearms and ammunition distributed with great regularity, because I have a right to it. There you go. Probably another issue that faced challenges getting media attention. Yeah. All right, Gene. Well, thank you so much for giving me your time today. And thank everybody here for checking out this video. And yeah, welcome to the first recording for the OneSpark Network. I hope everybody has an excellent day, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Be well out there, folks. Have a great day.